The movement she started will grow to be 100 years from now, the most influential of all time. When the history of our civilization is written, it will be a biological history, and Margaret Sanger will be its heroine. Author H.G. Wells, 1931.
Tonight we go after the story of the woman who violated convention and bucked powerful opposition to lead the birth control movement in America. You see her behind me. She is Mrs. Margaret Sanger, who was thrown into jail 8 different times for her efforts.
Margaret Sanger was the mother of the birth control movement. Like many great leaders in history, she had many obstacles to overcome. She was abused, prosecuted, jailed, and exiled at the hands of her own government because she promoted the illegal use of birth control. But Sanger never gave up. She was an imperfect leader who became embroiled in many controversies, but that did not stop her from changing the world. The early 1900s in the United States is often considered a time of change. Until that time, women had been confined to the home in the traditional roles of wife and mother, but their lives began to reflect the growing trends of industrialization and technological change. As a result of these developments, women started entering the workforce in large numbers, demanding better working conditions and wages, seeking higher education, and demanding the right to vote. Women realized that they had to take control of their own fertility so they could decide when to be a mother and when to work. Margaret Sanger was born in 1879 into an Irish working-class family. She witnessed her mother's slow death, worn out after 18 pregnancies and 11 live births. Margaret decided to become a nurse and midwife in one of the poorest neighborhoods in New York City, the Lower East Side. While working there, she witnessed many women dying in childbirth and dying at illegal attempts at abortion. Women told her of their agony of being unable to prevent pregnancies. Sanger received over 250,000 letters from women asking for advice about birth control. In 1928, Margaret Sanger published a selection of letters in her book, Motherhood in Bondage. Women's health was endangered by many pregnancies and bringing children into poverty. Her female patients literally begged Sanger to teach them what to do to prevent pregnancies. The turning point for Sanger came in 1912. As a nurse, she went back to take care of a woman who was hemorrhaging as a result of a botched abortion. Sadie Sachs, a 25-year-old with 5 children, asked her doctor, "What can I do to have no more children?" The doctor said, "Tell your husband to sleep on the roof." 6 months later, Margaret went back to visit Sachs, and Sanger learned that she had died from an infection. This is the moment Margaret Sanger decided to devote her life to making birth control accessible, cheap, and effective for women. A woman's body belongs to herself alone. It does not belong to the church, the United States government, or any other government on the face of the earth. The first step to getting life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is her decision whether or not to have children. Margaret Sanger, 1914.
Being a nurse, seeing patients die, she just thought this was a waste. She thought it was tragic. She thought it was criminal. And she said something needed to be done to stop this.
I would be heard from the housetops. I would tell the world what's going on. I would be heard no matter what the cost. I would be heard. Margaret Sanger. No person in the world would be heard more than Margaret Sanger over the next 50 years, as she became the definitive leader of the birth control movement. She felt it was her duty to get the word out to women that contraceptive methods existed and that they should have access to them. Sanger thought the best way to change the law was to break the law. The first law she had to change was the Comstock Law. It outlawed the discussion, distribution, and provision of anything relating to birth control or contraception. She wrote a series of articles called What Every Girl Should Know. Upon learning that the United States was going to arrest her for publishing indecent materials in her own newspaper, The Woman Rebel, Sanger moved to England rather than possibly spending 20 years in jail. During her time in England, Sanger met various radicals and feminists who affirmed her belief that women should have access to birth control. There, Sanger met Havelock Ellis, who expanded her arguments for the legalization of contraceptives. Sanger returned to the United States after living in England for a year and opened the first birth control clinic in Brooklyn in 1916. Shortly thereafter, the police raided and closed the clinic and Sanger was jailed. However, the publicity surrounding the arrest provided Sanger with a base of wealthy supporters and her cause began to gain steam. She began lecturing to packed audiences throughout the United States. In 1921, Margaret Sanger founded the American Birth Control League. This organization promoted the founding of birth control clinics. In 1918, the U.S. Court of Appeals ruled that physicians were exempt from the Comstock Law. This decision, in effect, gave doctors the right to prescribe contraceptives.
The judges said that the law was constitutional, the Comstock Law was constitutional, but they also said that the law had to allow for medical professionals to prescribe birth control if the doctor found a disease in the woman. That exception that the judges found in the Comstock Law opened the floodgates to the legalization of birth control.
Sanger also started the first clinic dedicated to scientific research for birth control and the first scientific journal dedicated to birth control. In 1942, the American Birth Control League, which Sanger founded 21 years earlier, became what is now known as Planned Parenthood and is now in 172 countries. Sanger's ultimate dream was the invention of a simple birth control pill for women. During the 1950s, she brought together a team to make this dream come true. A philanthropist, Catherine McCormick, a scientist, Gregory Pincus, and a physician, John Rock, combined in 1960 to bring about the first birth control pill called Inovid. When Gregory Pincus unveiled the pill, he called it the product of Sanger's pioneering resolution. Margaret Sanger's 50-year crusade to bring birth control to all women is filled with controversy. Some of this controversy is her own doing because she often aligned herself with socialists that would help her cause, and some of her controversy is fabricated by her two biggest adversaries, the U.S. government and the Church. The government opposed Sanger because of her frequent disregard for the law. The Catholic Church believed that the purpose of conjugal acts between husband and wife was to procreate. Sanger believed that the Catholic doctrine was illogical and not in accord with science and against social welfare. Margaret Sanger is called a racist by her adversaries in order to derail her leadership of the birth control movement.
I think that statement is total garbage, nonsense, historically inaccurate, factually inaccurate, and ideologically driven by whatever the beliefs of that commentator are. Nothing could be further from the truth, because she believed that every woman of every race should have access to birth control and should take control of her own destiny.
Margaret Sanger is accused of being a eugenicist. Eugenics is defined as the study of methods of improving the quality of the human race by selective breeding.
Some women with inherited diseases that they thought would be passed on to children, not much was known about genetics back then, she thought that these women should not have children. And so she did endorse involuntary sterilization for some women with diseases that would be passed on to their children. Was this right? No, it was wrong.
Margaret Sanger is accused of being promiscuous.
She had many lovers while married, while not married, indeed. Her view was that birth control liberated women to live as sexually fulfilling a life as men. And she thought that men and women couldn't completely be equal until they were equal in the bedroom. I think her legacy was making women or giving women the ability to truly be free of unwanted pregnancy, of being able to decide when and whether, in her words, to have children, to space their children so that they could be sure the children they had were healthy and the mothers were healthy and that death rates would fall.
She completely changed the social structure of families, communities, and ultimately of nations and of the world. It would not have been possible except for Margaret Sanger.
Every woman today owes the fact if she's not pregnant at the moment, she owes that to my grandmother. If the woman is having the children she wants to have when she wants to have them, she owes that to my grandmother. If women are working, if women are getting educated, they owe that to my grandmother. So one of the most important legacies of my grandmother to this day is the fact that she founded the International Planned Parenthood. And we are now in every country of the world, with the exception of 4 of them, the Ukraine, Saudi Arabia, Libya, and Yemen. We're in every other country, including the axis of evil. We're in Iran, Iraq, and North Korea. And we're providing family planning to hundreds of millions of women a year around the globe. And this is my grandmother's legacy.
Sanger lived long enough to see birth control become a basic right of American citizens. In 1965, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Griswold v. Connecticut that the private use of contraceptives was a constitutional right. Margaret Sanger died 8 months after the court decision, knowing she had won her 50-year battle for women to control their own fertility.